from the state?
No, sir.
Defense?
No, Your Honor.
Bring him in. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, did everyone follow the court's instructions overnight? Did anyone allow themselves, did anyone go do any independent research or allow themselves to be permitted to view any news accounts or social media accounts? Anyone fall in that category? Everyone's shaking their head in the negative. I'm about to give you the jury instructions. I've done this more times than I can count over the last 20, 25 years of my life. Sometimes I hear these instructions in my sleep, but I couldn't sit down and write them all out for you from scratch, I don't believe. You're going to have the instructions to take back with you. So just sit there and listen. You will have the instructions to take back with you to read during your deliberations, okay? All right, members of the jury, you have heard all the testimony and received the evidence in the course of this trial. When you took your places in the courtroom, you made an oath to follow and apply the instructions of the court regarding the law. The court will now instruct you as to the rules of law which you will use and apply to the evidence in deliberating your verdict. You are not to single out one instruction alone as stating the law, but you must consider these instructions as a whole. Neither are you to be concerned with the wisdom of any rule of law. Regardless of any opinion you may have as to what the law ought to be, it would be a violation of your sworn duty to base a verdict upon any other view of the law than that given in these instructions by the court. If in stating the law to you I repeat any rule, direction, or idea, or if I state the same in varying ways, no emphasis is intended, and you must not draw. Let's hold down the talk in the audience. If in stating the law to you I repeat any rule, direction, or idea, or if I state the same in varying ways, no emphasis is intended, and you must not draw any inference therefrom. The order in which these instructions are given has no significance as to their relative importance. It is your function to determine the facts in this case and to consider and weigh the evidence for that purpose. You are to apply the law to the facts and in this way decide the case. The evidence which you are to consider consists of the testimony and statements of the witnesses, any stipulations made by the attorneys, and any exhibits admitted into evidence. You are also permitted to draw such reasonable inferences from the evidence as seem justified in the light of your own experience. It is your prerogative to determine what weight and what credibility will be assigned the testimony and supporting evidence of each witness in this case. You are required and expected to use your good common sense and sound honest judgment in considering and weighing the testimony of each witness who has testified. You should not be influenced by bias, sympathy, or prejudice. Your verdict should be based on the evidence and not upon speculation, guesswork, or conjecture. The production of evidence in court is governed by rules of law. From time to time during the trial, it has been my duty as judge to rule on the admissibility of evidence. You must not concern yourselves with the reasons for the court's rulings, since they are controlled and governed by rules of law. You should not infer from any ruling by the court on these motions or objections to the evidence that the court or the judge has any opinion on the merits favoring one side or the other. You should not speculate as to possible answers to questions which the court did not require to be answered. Further, you should not draw any inference from the content of these questions. You are to disregard all evidence which was excluded by the court from consideration during the course of the trial. The law presumes every person charged with the commission of a crime to be innocent. This presumption places upon the state of Mississippi the burden of proving the defendant guilty of every material element of the crime with which she is charged. Before you can return a verdict of guilty, the state must prove that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant is not required to prove her innocence. The verdict of the jury must represent the considered judgment of each juror. In order to return a verdict, it will be necessary that each juror agree thereto. In other words, all 12 jurors must agree on any verdict in this case. It is your duty as jurors to consult with one another and to deliberate in view of reaching an agreement if you can do so without violence to your individual judgment. Each of you must decide for yourself, but do so only after an impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. In the course of your deliberation, do not hesitate to re-examine your own views and change your opinion if convinced that it is erroneous, but do not surrender your honest convictions as to the weight or effect of evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. The court instructs the jury that the defendant has a constitutional right not to testify at trial. You should not draw any inference from the defendant's failure to testify. The defendant's failure to testify should not in any way be considered by you during the course of your deliberations. The court instructs the jury that you have heard testimony from expert witnesses. Persons who by education and experience have become an expert in some field may state their opinion on matters in that field and may also state their reasons for the opinion. Expert opinion testimony should be judged just like any other testimony. You may accept it or reject it, and you may give it as much weight as you think it deserves, considering the witness's education and experience, the reasons given for the opinion, and all other evidence in this case. You are instructed that the indictment creates no inference of guilt, and the fact that the defendant was indicted shall not be considered as evidence against him by the jury, and no inference of guilt can be drawn therefrom. You must not base your verdict solely on the number of witnesses for either party. The defendant, Carly Madison Greg, has been charged by indictment in count 1 with the crime of first-degree murder, in count 2 with the crime of attempted murder, and in count 3 with the crime of tampering with physical evidence. Count 1. The court instructs the jury that the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, has been charged in the indictment with the crime of first-degree murder. You find from the evidence in this case beyond a reasonable doubt that on about the 19th day of March 2024 in Rankin County, Mississippi, the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, did willfully, feloniously, and without authority of law kill and murder Ashley Smiley, a human being. With deliberate design to effect the death of Ashley Smiley, then you shall find the defendant guilty as charged in count 1. If the state has failed to prove any one or more of the above listed elements beyond a reasonable doubt, then you shall find the defendant not guilty as charged in count 1 of the indictment. The court instructs the jury that the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, has been charged in the indictment with the crime of attempted murder. If you find from the evidence in this case beyond a reasonable doubt that on about the 19th day of March 2024 in Rankin County, Mississippi, the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously attempt to kill Heath Smiley, a human being, but failed to complete the act, then you shall find the defendant guilty as charged in count 2. If the state has failed to prove any one or more of the above listed elements beyond a reasonable doubt, then you shall find the defendant not guilty as charged in count 2 of the indictment. Count 3, the court instructs the jury that the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, has been charged in the indictment with the crime of tampering with physical evidence. If you find from the evidence in this case beyond a reasonable doubt that on about the 19th day of March 2024 in Rankin County, Mississippi, the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously intentionally destroy, mutilate, conceal, remove, or alter physical evidence with intent to impair its use, verity, or availability in the pending criminal investigation or prospective official proceeding, then you shall find the defendant guilty as charged in count 3. If the state has failed to prove any one or more of the above listed elements beyond a reasonable doubt, then you shall find the defendant not guilty as charged in count 3 of the indictment. The court instructs the jury that there is a presumption that an accused is sane, and therefore the burden is initially on the accused to introduce evidence which creates a reasonable doubt as to her sanity at the time of the act. However, once the defendant has created a reasonable doubt as to the defendant's sanity, it is the burden of the state to present sufficient evidence to prove the defendant's sanity beyond a reasonable doubt. The court instructs the jury that the following is the definition of insanity in Mississippi. Insanity exists when at the time of committing the act, the accused was laboring under such defect of reason from disease of mind as 1, to not know the nature and quality of the act she was doing, or 2, if she did know the nature and quality of the act, she did not know that what she was doing was wrong. The court instructs the jury that if you find that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt all the essential elements of count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence, then you must find the defendant guilty of count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence, unless the state of Mississippi has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was sane at the time The defendant committed the crimes of count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence. In order to prove the defendant saying that the commission of the crimes of count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that at the time of the commission of the crimes of count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence, the defendant had the mental capacity to realize and appreciate the nature and quality of her acts and to distinguish between right and wrong with reference to the act she committed. If after considering all of the evidence in this case you find that the state has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was sane at the time of the commission of the crimes in count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, attempted murder, and count 3, tampering with physical evidence, then your verdict must be not guilty by reason of insanity. The court instructs the jury that if you find that the defendant, when sober, is capable of distinguishing between right and wrong, and the defendant voluntarily deprives herself of the ability to distinguish between right and wrong by reason of becoming intoxicated and commits an offense while in that condition, she is criminally responsible for such acts. The court instructs the jury that when all 12 of you reach and agree upon a verdict as to the indictment, you shall return the verdict to the court in one of the following forms. Count 1. Should you find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty by reason of insanity, then state your verdict in one of the following forms. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that the defendant has since been restored to reason. Close quote. R. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that she has not been restored to her reason and is a danger to the community. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder. Close quotes. Count 2. Should you find the defendant guilty of attempted murder as charged in the indictment, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, guilty of attempted murder as charged in the indictment. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty by reason of insanity, then state your verdict in one of the following forms. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that the defendant has since been restored to reason. Close quotes. R. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that she has not been restored to her reason and is a danger to the community. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty of attempted murder, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of attempted murder. Count 3. Should you find the defendant guilty of tampering with evidence as charged in the indictment, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, guilty of tampering with evidence as charged in the indictment. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty by reason of insanity, then state your verdict in one of the following forms. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that the defendant has since been restored to reason. Close quotes. R. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, not guilty by reason of insanity, and we find that she has not been restored to her reason and is a danger to the community. Close quotes. Should you find the defendant not guilty of tampering with evidence, then state your verdict as follows. Quote, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of tampering with evidence. Close quotes. Write your verdicts on a clean, separate sheet of paper. It is not necessary that you sign the verdicts. Counsel for both sides will now have an opportunity to address you and make their closing or final arguments. The arguments, statements, and remarks of counsel are intended to help you understand the evidence and apply the law, but they are not evidence. The attorneys in making these arguments to you will be commenting upon the testimony that you have heard and the evidence that has been presented in this case. They, as you, will be recalling the evidence that has been presented. They should not intentionally try to mislead you. However, if their recollection of the evidence differs from what your recollection is, you must follow your own recollection. If any argument, statement, or remark has no basis in the evidence, then you should disregard that argument, statement, or remark. Jury instructions will be on the bench in front of the court. If either side needs them, you can come get them. If you use them, return them in the same order you picked them up in. Closing arguments on behalf of the state. Mr. Shipley, you'll keep time?
May it please the court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Ms. Todd stood before you on Monday in her opening statement and told you this is not a case about who did it. And in fact, all of the evidence that you've seen tells you exactly that. It's not a case about who did it. You haven't seen one shred of evidence in this case that what happened on March 19th, 2024 was caused by anyone other than Carly Madison Greg. The defense also told you during opening statements on Monday that the state wants you to leave your common sense at the door. That they want you to tie it up in a bucket and leave it at the door. Ladies and gentlemen, all we want you to do in this case is use your common sense. And in fact, that's what Judge Arthur just instructed you to do in the very first jury instruction. And I want to talk about a few of these jury instructions with you real quick. But in jury instruction number 1, which you'll have back in the room with you, on the second page, he instructs you, you're required and expected to use your good common sense and sound, honest judgment in considering and weighing the testimony of each witness who has testified. You should not be influenced by bias, sympathy, or prejudice. Your verdict should be based on the evidence and not upon speculation, guesswork, or conjecture. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the state, all we want you to do is to go back there and use your good common sense and your sound, honest judgment. And again, I don't believe that you've heard one shred of evidence throughout this entire week that the person who shot Ashley Smiley was in fact Carly Madison Greg. The person who shot and attempted to kill Heath Smiley was Carly Madison Greg. And the person who took down the camera from the kitchen and hid it in the refrigerator behind some water bottles was Carly Madison Greg. Now, Judge Arthur also read you the elements of the crimes. And again, you'll have this information back there with you in the jury instructions. It's jury instruction number 8. And I kind of want to go down because as a simple person myself, I like to kind of have a roadmap as to where I'm going. So I like to be able to look at things and see them on paper, and that's exactly what these jury instructions provide you, kind of a roadmap to help guide you in your deliberations. So I want to talk about count 1, which is the first degree murder. And there's 3 elements here that it has listed. And the very first one says that on about the 19th day of March 2024 in Rankin County, Mississippi. That's the first thing you have to find. Ladies and gentlemen, all the testimony has been that this happened on March 19th, 2024. You heard from Deputy Hunter Lewis, who was the first deputy who arrived on the scene there, that he was called out that day, that he received a call from dispatch to respond to 214 Ashton Way, which is in the Farmington Station subdivision off of Old Fannin Road. And you heard Mr. Kevin Collins, the 911 dispatcher, who told you that the call out came on that day at that time about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you heard them tell you that obviously Farmington Station is located in Rankin County, Mississippi. So there's no question as to that first part of the element there. As to number 2, that the defendant Carly Madison Greg did willfully, feloniously, and without authority of law kill and murder Ashley Smiley, a human being. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard from Mr. Cliff Dunlap, the deputy coroner, who told you that the manner and cause of death in this case was found to be 3 gunshot wounds to the head, and that it was found to be homicide, and that the victim was indeed identified as Miss Ashley Smiley. The last part there is that she did it with deliberate design to effect the death of Ashley Smiley, the victim. Ladies and gentlemen, I would submit to you that in the state of Mississippi, when it talks about deliberate design, that it's simply talking about an intent to kill. An intent to kill the victim, Ashley Smiley, that she did this with an intent to kill. And I would further submit to you that the use of a deadly weapon is an intent to kill. Whenever you aim a deadly weapon, a pistol, a .357 revolver, at someone's head and you shoot 3 times, that's certainly an intent to kill. Now, again, it's not a case about who did it. and I'll show you some of the video here in just a second. But let's think about what happened that day. So you remember from the video, you saw from the garage, you heard several witnesses talk about it, that earlier that day, Mr. Bennett Germany and another friend, Sarah Catherine Rayleigh, who the defense put on the stand yesterday, you heard from them, and they said they devised this plan to go talk to Ashley, to go talk to Carly's mom, because they were worried about Carly. They were good friends. They were worried about Carly, and they were worried about her drug use, her use of burner phones. And I just want to be clear, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case about marijuana and whether or not she was smoking marijuana. This is a case about whether or not she was intoxicated, voluntary intoxicated. You heard me talk to Dr. Clark about that she would, one of these times that she says she has one of these events where she supposedly zoned out. That, in fact, what happened was that she went and smoked marijuana. It could have been any drug, but it was just marijuana. And she zoned out, and she had this event where supposedly she says that she, fell out on the floor and whatever happened. And she did that after her mom and Heath left one day and went to the grocery store. But I just want to be clear, it's not a case about marijuana. It's simply a case about, her actions. And so Bennett and Sarah Catherine, they devised this plan. They're going to tell Miss Smiley. Well, obviously, you heard testimony that one of the things that Miss Smiley was worried about was her daughter, Carly, the love of her life. You heard that she had another daughter who died at a very young age from some type of genetic disorder that she had. So you got Carly here. She's the love of Ashley's life. Obviously, she's disappointed, probably a little bit sad, probably worried for her daughter. And the last thing that she wants her to do, according to the defense, is turn into her dad, right? Her biological dad, who you've heard about, who obviously liked to use a lot of drugs, abuse a lot of drugs. So at some point, she confronts Carly. She searches her backpack, whether in the car, on the ride home, or at the school. And then you see them get home, and you heard Dr. Pickett talk about it yesterday, that the situation seemed a little bit tense, right? That they get out of the car in their garage. You don't hear, they're not talking to each other. And they go in, you see Ashley put her coat and her phone down on the bar there in the kitchen, and she proceeds directly to the side of the house where Carly's room's located, presumably to start searching through Carly's room, right? And so you see Carly kind of walk back and forth. You see her walk there to the living room area and kind of listen to see what her mom's doing. At some point, she eventually takes the dogs out, right? I don't know what happened while she was outside, ladies and gentlemen, but at some point whenever she was outside, she made up her mind, if not long before. We'll talk about that in a second, her conversations with her friend from MSMS, Thad, that you heard from. But at some point outside, she makes up her mind exactly what she's going to do. And she comes back in from taking out the dogs. She walks there to that living room area, kind of listens to see if her mom's still in her room. And then, without hesitation, she walks, as Dr. Pickett said, to the side of the house, her mom and Heath's bedroom, where this pistol is located. She knows it's located there. Now, they want you to believe that from the time she brought the dogs back in, or took the dogs out, that she blacked out at that point. You heard me ask Dr. Clark. Well, from the time she took out the dogs to the time she was arrested by Deputy Shack, who you also heard from, that she was blacked out in that period. Well, that's a real convenient time to be blacked out, right? And so she brings the dogs back in, and she goes directly to her mom's room and Heath's room, and she retrieves this pistol. And you see her walk back across the screen. Well, when she gets there, she looks around the corner into the kitchen to make sure that her mom hasn't come out of her room, knowing exactly what she's doing. Cool, calm, calculated, and callous. She walks directly, she proceeds to her room, and a couple seconds later, you hear the shots. Boom, boom. You hear 2 shots within 3 seconds of each other. You've seen the pictures. You heard Dr. Pickett testify yesterday. 2 well-placed shots right to the side of Miss Smiley's head, a relatively small target. And then a couple seconds later, boom, you hear a third shot right under the chin. And we believe it's right under the chin is the third shot. We know it's right under the chin. We believe it's the third shot. You heard Deputy Investigator Burnell talk about the stippling, the powder burn around the shot, right? And he tells you that based off his training and experience that shot had to be within 36 inches because that's when you see stippling. The powder that comes out that's still ignited, that doesn't have time to burn, and it burns right here on Miss Smiley's face. And then what does she do? Immediately. You'll see on the video that happens at 4:14 p.m. Immediately she comes back in. She gets on her mom's phone. She has the wherewithal to enter her mom's code onto her phone and to text someone specific. And that someone specific was her stepdad, Heath Smiley. And you'll see that text message was sent within the same minute, 4:14, that she shot and killed her mom. And what does she say to him? Something to the effect of, "When are you going to be home, honey?" And it's perfect grammar. The comma's in the right place right before honey. Right? She knows exactly what she's doing. She comes in there. She knows exactly where the camera is. She comes. She's got the gun hidden behind her. She slides down into the chair, and you hear her put it down on the bar stool. You can hear it whenever you get back to the jury room. You'll be able to hear that. She puts it down. You hear Dr. Pickett talk about she's got the wherewithal to know exactly where the dogs are. The dog walks behind her. You'll see him. He walks behind her, and she knows let me make sure he doesn't knock the gun off. Right? At some point, she begins text messaging her friend. She shoots her mom at 4:14. Then she invites her friend from school, who you heard from, Brooke. She invites Brooke over. You'll see the messages between her and Brooke. They're in evidence. And you'll see where Brooke texts her at 4:58, basically 45 minutes later, and says, "I'm here." Brooke had no clue what she was about to walk into. Carly meets her at the door, says something to the effect of, "Have you ever seen or are you squeamish of dead bodies?" Well, Brooke says, "I don't know. I've never seen a dead body." Not thinking that there's a dead body currently in the house. Right? Carly's walking around with the gun. Carly leads her back to the room and shows her dead mom, who's got her arms crossed over, who's been posed. Right? She's posed her mom at this point. She's put her arms across her. She's put a red towel over her face. Again, cool, calm, and calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly who to reach out to during this time. She's reaching out to all of her friends. You heard from multiple friends that she reached out to. You heard from her friend Thad, who she was texting, and actually before they text, she calls him on FaceTime. And what does she tell him? Well, she tells him, and excuse my language, "I fucked up." Right? Well, how do you know you messed up if you don't know what you did? She knew what she did. She knew the difference between right and wrong. So she obviously tells Thad, but she can't tell him what she did. She knows she can't tell him over the phone. Well, then, being a good friend and being worried, Thad begins to text her after they get off the phone. And they're messaging. Well, of course, in the meantime, she's walking back and forth in and out of her room where her mom's located. She's walking back and forth. She's sending messages to multiple other friends. And Dad is messaging her, but he can't get a response. And he says, "I'm worried about you. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to call 911. And she says, "You can't do that." Why? Why can't you call 911? Because she knows what she did was wrong. And she doesn't want 911 over there because she's about to try to kill Heath. And she doesn't want 911 over there because it's going to ruin her plan. Right? Knowing the difference between right and wrong. And you heard me, I very specifically asked Dr. Clark, you render the opinion that she could not appreciate the difference between right and wrong. Right? Well, you heard Dr. Pickett and Dr. Gugliano testify yesterday. That's not the standard in Mississippi. In fact, there's an instruction in here that defines, it's jury instruction number 10, that defines exactly what insanity is. And it goes on down there, and it says that the accused was laboring under such defective reasoning from disease of mind as to not know the nature and quality of the act she was doing, or 2, if she did know the nature and quality of the act she was doing, she did not know what she was doing was wrong. It's not appreciate. The standard in Mississippi is not that you appreciate the difference between right and wrong. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Look at all of her actions. Sneaking around the house, calling over the friends, knowing not to tell the friends over the phone what she did. SK that they called in yesterday, her friend. You know, what does she say? Dr. Pickett talked about it. Well, she says, I'll tell you tomorrow if I see you. Well, why would I not see you tomorrow? Well, because I'm going to be in jail probably. Right? She knew what she did was wrong. She tells her friend, Brooke, whenever Brooke comes over, she says, I put 3 in my mom, and I've got 3 more in here for Heath whenever he gets home. Right? I'm going to take care of him. 3 more what? 3 more bullets in the gun. She texted her friend, Bennett, tried to call him, did call him, text him, and he tells her, of course, again, he's a good friend too. He's worried about her. Same one that told her mom what had been going on, that he was worried about her. Trying to do the right thing. He tells her, don't hurt yourself or anyone else. Don't harm yourself or anyone else. What does she say? Too late. Again, knowing the difference between right and wrong. You saw the video from Deputy Shack, and they want you to believe that he did something wrong because he muted his body cam or whatever he did. He told you that whenever he got Carly out of the back of his car and the other deputy started performing the GSR test on Carly's hands, which you saw them doing there, being as nice as all get out to her, right? Baby, are you okay? You heard him say that his involvement in the case was over. He never went in the house. He didn't transport her to jail or anywhere else.
2 minutes, sir.
They want you to believe that him muting the body cam was him doing something wrong. He told you that his involvement was done and over at that time. Now, I want to play just a short clip of the video for you before my time's up.
further time will be deducted from the back end.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt that Carly Madison Greg is the one who killed her mom, Ashley Smiley. There's no doubt that she attempted to kill Smiley when she aimed the gun right at his head and shot and hit him in the shoulder. And there's no doubt that she's the one who hid the camera, thus tampering with evidence in the refrigerator. And we would ask you that you go back there and you find her guilty of all three, because she was not insane at the time that this happened. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew the difference between right and wrong.
A minute and a half on the back end, so it'll be 18 and a half minutes. All right, closing by the defense.